Hello, Howard. Thanks very much for joining me on the show.
Well, Karl, I got to tell you, it's a pleasure. I've been looking forward to it since we connected. I always love catching up with you and talking about the mental side of the game, especially with somebody as esteemed as you are, with all your background. And I'm just a humble golf player with some experience that I can share, and I'd be happy to with your audience.
That's why I invited you on, Howard. I knew you'd say nice things about me at the beginning. I wouldn't have to wait to the
That's
end.
right, right off the top. Let me just kiss your ass to begin with.
Absolutely.
Let's get that
Yeah,
out of the way,
stroke the
everybody.
egos for as long as you like. Howard, I know you've got the show with Tim, Swing Thoughts, which I think is a
Yes.
brilliant podcast. I always listen to it because I think you two bounce off each other wonderfully well, talking about the challenges and the chaos that this game throws at us. But what I want to do for just to sort of set the scene for everybody listening to this show is I know you've led an incredibly interesting life as a radio show host, a stand-up comedian, all that kind of thing. Just fill in a little bit of history, just to give people a flavour of what your career has been and your life's been all about.
Um, well, thank you. It's hard not to talk about yourself in terms of like my resume as a performer without sounding like a complete douche. But yeah, I've been all of those things. I've been a radio host, television host in Canada, stand-up comic, worked all over North America in clubs, and did some opening for some bigger comedians. And I've been in Toronto, morning host, broadcaster for 35 years, and for the last 13 years have hosted a podcast of the sort of morning show I used to do. And we've been recording, we've done over a couple of thousand shows. And then about 9 years ago, I hooked up with a great golf writer and a friend, Tim O'Connor, to produce a golf show, sort of for the average golfer, in terms of the mental side of the game. And of all the things I've just mentioned and all the things I've been interested in, I've been golfing and have been interested in playing and how the game is played, both mentally and physically, for the longest time. And as I used to say to my ex-wife, I used to say, if I'd ever thought of anything, that's why she's my ex-wife. You'll see in a second. I used to say, if I'd ever thought of anything as much as I thought of my golf swing, we'd be way richer, or I figure I could have cured something. Not a big thing, but I think I could have taken care of something. I don't know, hammer toe, lupus.
Some disease would have been wiped off the
Absolutely.
face of the.
It's like, and I think, I just think of the time I've spent. I didn't say wasted. The time I've spent thinking about golf has been really one of the joys of my life. And I've enjoyed it so much the last 9 years because I've gotten to interview people like yourself. We were just talking before you hit record about how many times you've been on the show. But through the show, I've gotten to meet all sorts of people and have conversations like we're going to have about the part of golf that I find the most interesting.
And looking at your own game, Howard, I mean, you are now, when I come onto the show, I'm in the presence of golf spiritual leader, as you are now known all across Canada, which we'll get onto
Yes.
later.
Yeah.
But what is how would you say your relationship to the game has evolved over the past few years?
That's a great question. And I'm only hesitating because, if you wanted to take a break, have a coffee, get some lunch, because that question has a long answer to it. But the semi truncated version of the answer would be, I was the worst, and I've said this before, I was the worst golfer I'd ever met to play with. The worst, the most sulky, the poutiest, the giving uppiest. I don't know if that's a phrase. The quick to anger, the quick temper, the rage, the slamming of the clubs, the two-stroke, two bad swings away from giving up and the game being over. And yet through all of that, I was a pretty talented physical golfer. I could play pretty well. And on days when things went my way, I could shoot some pretty good scores, have been close to scratch or scratch adjacent for a very long time. So a lot of people would think, well, that's great. Wouldn't you just be happy with that? And the thing that I wasn't happy with, the state of my game, was how I would react when there was, as you know, as Raymond Pryor, your friend and my friend, say, when score matters, I became a different golfer,
Mm.
and I was unable to deal with the vagaries of the game to any degree where I wanted to advance my play. I wanted to play at the highest level of amateur golf, and in those situations that I would find myself in, this golfer that I was didn't allow me to thrive when score matters and the pressure increased, et cetera, et cetera. And more importantly, as I've gotten older, I wasn't enjoying myself very much. And so my exploration of the mental side of the game started long before I met Tim and you and all the other people that I've been lucky enough to have conversations with. But I knew there was something wrong with the way I was approaching golf. And so around 1995, 96, I started reading. The first book I ever read on this subject was Bob Rotella's The Golf is Not a Game of Perfect. And to say that it changed my life, and I'm being dramatic or hyperbole, but it got me thinking that maybe there was a different way for me to show up as a golfer. And so that's kind of I know that's the long-winded short version of it, but that's how I got onto this side of golf. And I'm no expert other than I am an expert in this. I'm an expert in poor behavior and I am. And because I've rarely met somebody whose behavior rivaled mine for being a shitty little baby. You know, that as one of my coaches says, you got to learn to put on your big boy pants because golf demands it. So I have become an expert in what it takes from going from that extreme to being able to where I'm at now, which is enjoy the game in all its forms, no matter whether it's a round with friends or a round of qualifying for an amateur tournament.
And do you think within that, Howard, that there's a point where you've been able to separate your value as a person from your value as or your performance as a golfer on any given day?
Well, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had several breakthroughs
Right.
along the way. I've had lots of golf mini epiphanies about, oh, I see. If I'm a little nicer to myself, then whether I make par or double or triple on a hole, maybe I won't have to slam a putter into my foot. I was telling a new friend I was talking to about golf the other day, and I said, yeah, there was a time when, you know, I have hit myself so hard with the putter, I cracked my foot. I'm not even exaggerating. So yes, I've learned to separate self from, you know, I can't remember exactly what Dr. Pryor's phrase is.
Raymond talks about separating self from craft, doesn't he?
Self from craft.
Yeah.
Ray was another guy I spent some time with last summer. I availed myself of his services because by the time I talked to Ray, I was well down the road. But you know, I look at people like you and Ray and Fred Shoemaker, all people I've had the pleasure and honor of talking to about this stuff, almost like finishing school, almost like, you know, having a bit of a foundation in all these things. And then you talk to someone like you or Ray, and you're like, oh, I see a different level. But at the very, very basics, separating self from craft, not identifying so much with, if I play bad, I'm a bad person, has actually given me the ability to have all kinds of experiences on the golf course unrelated to what I shot that day, comma, and the irony, as you well know, what's coming is the irony is you actually end up playing better on a gradient of I just play better more often because I'm okay if I don't. And that's the biggest breakthrough for me.
And is that not the heart of all of, well, not all of it, but a big part of it, Howard, is that I think we all go through that period where we're resisting outcomes, aren't we? We're resisting poor shots, we're resisting missing putts, we're resisting shooting 80 or whatever it may be. And it's that very resistance that actually increases the likelihood of it happening. The point when you can get to where you're able to deal with all the outcomes, you're able to accept whatever goes on. The paradox of that is there's freedom at the other side of that, isn't there? And I think the thing is as well, and I'd like your take on this, is that it's never a fixed entity, is it? This is something you're going to keep contemplating probably for the
Absolutely.
entire time that you play the game.
You know, the phrase ever vigilant definitely describes what we're talking about because I mean, it's become a bit more innate in me. At first, when I really delved into this, say 10 or 11 years ago, I started working with a guy named Paul Doolin, who
Mm.
fine, mental performance coach, works with tour players. But it was sort of very uh, conscious at first, excuse me, and it's become more and more unconscious. But I constantly am, thinking about, what attitude am I going to bring? What am I bringing to the golf course today on any given day, whether it's competitive or not? And I should let your listeners know most of my rounds are competitive. I don't play I play very little golf where score isn't being handed in. And back to that concept, the irony of what we're talking about, again, irony or the net of, working on this kind of stuff is I can go into competition and feel pretty good about whatever happens that day. I'm going to be fine. And unlike the guy I used to be, I would be so nervous about posting a high score and what would that say about me that very often it led to me being resistant, not being acceptance, not having acceptance, and showing up with a less than, pleasing score and feeling, I don't know, I can't remember. Do you swear on your show?
Oh, yeah,
Feeling
yeah.
shitty, feeling shitty about myself. So not only did I play bad, but now I got to beat myself up. And that's another thing I worked on with Ray a lot was why do I feel the need to self-flagellate if I have a bad round? But surprise, a lot of golfers do that. A lot of golfers go over their rounds, say things about themselves, I'm sure everyone knows that, things you'd never say to a friend. So I worked through a lot of that. And again, the net of it is whatever I shoot in a tournament and people are following along online and they're seeing what scores I shoot, I'm okay when it's over. I'm fine.
Going back to the stand-up comedian days, I mean, I can't imagine anything more challenging than that in many ways, that you stand naked in front of an audience, people expecting you to be funny, and it's kinda like you've gotta make 3 birdies on the first 3 holes to just get through and play the rest of the round kinda thing. Did you suffer any doubts in that environment? And if so, was it similar to golf or very different?
By the way, just for context, I don't stand naked in front of people, although that would be pretty fun. There's very, you know what? It's a great question as well, because I have talked a lot about the art of performance with people like Paul Doolin, who are generally performance, and so is Ray. Like, you know, I don't want this to be a commercial for Dr. Raymond Pryor, although I just noticed you and Ray have done some stuff
Mm,
together.
yeah.
And Ray just doesn't work with golfers. He works with singers and artists and actors because, as you've said, there's a lot of parallels in the world of performance. The thing about doing stand up, and I still do it. I did a show. I'll probably do 4 or 5 events a year. I did a thing a couple months ago for a corporate. I'm doing stand up again in a month. Last fall, I went on stage. A friend of mine's pretty well known North American comedian. I opened for him in front of 1,000 people. And the feelings you have backstage before you do it are very similar to walking from the putting green to the first tee of an important tournament. And the things I've learned in golf, performance wise, have helped me in stand up from this aspect. When I walk out, I have this feeling of acceptance. I'm going to accept whatever comes at me. I've been doing this a long time, both stand up and golf. And I've prepared, I've worked on my act. I know it pretty well. I've memorized it. And so in that moment of, walking out, and especially last fall, I mean, this is a pretty big show. People had spent a lot of money to see my friend, and I was one of the opening acts. But I was just open to the experience. And that's kind of what I talked a lot about with Paul Doolin years ago is there's acceptance of a bad shot. Yes, and you hit it out of bounds and you're okay. You don't freak out. Okay, that's one level. But there's this pre-acceptance that you're okay come what may.
Yeah.
And so in those two places, like when I walk onto the first tee of a tournament, as I did 3 days ago, yeah, I'm excited, but I'm also ready to turn it loose. I'm also ready to just hit it.
Mm.
And I've accepted where it will go before I've hit it.
Mm.
Same with walking on stage. To be honest with you, 1,000 people is easier than 100 people, because 1,000 people, if half of them laugh, it sounds great, right? There's an infectiousness to it.
There's a tipping point.
But still, when I walk out, I was going to be fine. I knew in my mind that I would be fine no matter what came my way. I had that feeling that, if I could hit a couple of bad shots and still be all right. And you do. Like, that's the thing about stand up. I've got an act, a lot of it works. And every once in a while, you'll say something and it doesn't get a reaction. This is the best part. It's how you react, because the audience can smell it,
Right.
and so can golf. And we've all been in foursomes or a tournament where somebody's had a bad hole, and then you get to see what they're like from the green to the next tee. You can tell a lot about how the rest of the day is going to go by how they react to when things go wrong. And that's very similar to stand-up. So when things go wrong, when I'm doing my act, I have enough confidence. No, listen, okay, I'll say things like, okay, that wasn't very funny to you, but in the next couple of minutes, I promise you'll be fine. And that's all audience wants to know. All audience want to know is, will they be okay? And that's kind of what golfers have. As long as you feel like, hey, I could have a bad hole and I'll be okay, then generally things will turn out all right.
But what's really interesting about that, hopefully I'm on the right track
Hopefully
with
something was interesting about that, Karl, because I have no idea.
There's got to be something somewhere in that. But what I was thinking when you said that was, in terms of your ability to interact with the audience, I would imagine when you're doing good stand-up comedy, not that I've ever tried it, not that I would try it, but if you're doing good stand-up comedy, I would imagine you have the ability to interact with the audience, as you've just described. If you're terrified, you're just going to be in your own head, interacting with your own thought. Is that not similar then to golfers when it's played well? You are still able to interact with the golf course and listen to the golf course and respond to what it's asking of you, as opposed to when you're resisting outcomes and you're so mad or you're so nervous or whatever, that you actually stop interacting with the golf course and responding to it.
No, I love that. I like that for so many reasons. Let's start with the second part first, which is, a lot of times, and I have conversations, with golfers. I interact with a lot of our listeners. I even, I a few years ago I became immersed in the decade strategy, so I work with some guys about that. But so when I'm talking to somebody about their round, as I often do, it's what you just said. Sometimes we'll go through a bad hole, and you'll see how they really weren't present, how they were doing things by routine and rote. Where, as you just said, when you listen to when you really listen and feel what's going on, you make better decisions. So with stand up, and there was a time a couple of years ago I was doing 4 or 5 sets a week at different comedy clubs, and so I was getting back. It was like playing a lot of rounds of golf. And there would be nights when I would walk out and I could tell I wasn't there. First minute, a minute and a half, I was saying things and it was getting a bit of a reaction. And I could tell, I could just see to my mind's eye that I wasn't present. And I remember doing this on purpose, stopping, taking a breath and saying, okay, you've got to be here in this room now. You've got to arrive, because oftentimes, like golfers, I don't know if we've ever talked about this when you've been a guest on our show, but for a lot of golfers, they like to sneak up on a round. What I mean by that is, like, they hope the first couple of 3 holes will go by with nothing bad happening. And it's almost like they're on edge a little bit. Whereas, tournament players or better players know the game starts on the first tee, because you can hit a great shot, sure, but you can also neck one out of bounds. And if you're not ready to play and present, a lot of bad things happen to people waiting who aren't prepared for them to happen. Are you with me so far?
Mm-hmm.
So when I do stand up, I have the same approach. I'm backstage, and the last thing I say to myself is, this isn't about you.
Right.
It's not about you, Howard, because if I make it about me, then I am in my head trying to remember it perfectly, trying to remember the order. But once I've done all the preparation, and when they introduce me, I walk and I go, okay, now I'm here for you. And I have that feeling to the audience that, just as you said, we're here to do this together. This is interact. I'm here. I'm in this room right now. And if what I'm about to say, I make a mistake, sometimes if I screw up a joke, I'll go back to, because I have notes in my back pocket. I'll go, hang on a second. No, that's not. I'll look at no. Go, that's not what I was trying to say. Let me just do this for you. So that's what I said about the audience. All they want to know is that you're with them.
Yeah.
that you're part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, as you were going through that, I mean, I haven't done stand-up comedy, but I've done
But you
thousands.
you do presentations.
Yeah, but I was going to say I've done thousands of presentations, well, not thousands, but certainly hundreds of presentations over the years, all across UK, Europe, the world, and I think of the best ones. There's always a situation afterwards where I think, where the hell did that story come from? You know, where did that quip come from? Or somebody just said something in the. It's almost like when you're prepared to let go, something
Yeah.
else emerges. That if you're if you over plan it and try and create too much structure, you just get in your own way completely. And it sounds very much similar to the stand up there.
Um, and when you said that about over preparing and too structured, doesn't that sound like, a lot of bad rounds of golf are played when you're trying to be too routine and not
Yeah,
react. I know you kid me about, one of the things I talk a lot about on Swing Thoughts, our golf podcast. We interview a lot of people like Carl and Ed and Fred and all these wonderful, Ellen Langer has been a guest on our show. But a lot of the things we talk about are, things from my golf experiences, Tim's. And, I draw a lot of that because I go through a lot of the same things that a lot of amateur golfers go through. And as I said at the beginning, I've rarely met people that were worse than I used to be. And so why I call myself golf spiritual leader, I do it ironically, is because no one was worse than me. And I always think, well, I got through it. I've evolved to a point where, I have an equanimity about me when I play. And yeah, I want to shoot low scores, but I also, there's a phrase that I've been talking a lot about on our show lately. Is a friend of mine who, at the bottom of his emails, it always says, play great or be great to play with. And the way I used to be, my
is that
paradigm.
Kent? Is that Kent?
No, it's not Ken. Actually, yeah, it's not. Although Ken Osborne, another guru of mine, and he's been on your show.
Yeah.
Scratch Attitude, great guy. Actually, it's another guy I play golf with, who I never really got it. I thought, okay, the way I thought of golf was, I'll be great to play with if I'm playing great.
Yeah.
And that was who I was, because I just thought, I would be a serious golfer. I practice all the time. I'm close to scratch. I've shot some good scores. So that's who I am. And a couple things have happened to me. Part of it is I got older. I mean, I think with age, certainly has calmed me down. Also, 9 years ago, I've shared this with other people, so I'll share it with your audience. I stopped drinking. Now, I'm not here to be a proselytize alcohol versus not, but it made a big difference in my life.
Mm.
It made a difference physiologically, and the physiological changes made a difference on my psychological, my ability to withstand stress. Absolutely made a difference. And if you'll let me keep going, I'll tell you a great story.
Yeah, correct.
So I've played at the highest level. I played in the Canadian Amateur. I played in the Canadian Mid-Am as recently as a couple of years ago. Canadian Senior Am. I played a lot of pretty high level tournaments, and the biggest one every year is the Ontario Senior Am, because that gets you into the Canadians. So last couple of years, I've gone to the qualifier, and qualifiers suck because if you don't shoot a good score that day, you have to wait a year. And I've been lucky. I've qualified for a few, but the last couple of years, I didn't qualify. So this year, this was in June. I played in the month of June. I played probably 14 or 15 different events, invitationals, qualifiers, 2-man events. Me and Kent and I played a 2-man event. And I go to the qualifier, and it's just not my day. I missed qualifying by quite a bit. I missed qualifying by 5 shots. So not a great day. But the guys I was playing with were having a great day, and they were both, playing very nicely. All three of us played similar on the front 9. The back 9 I faded, and the last 4 or 5 holes, I didn't give up, but I knew that, listen, I'm way off the number. Now, an earlier version of myself would have been shitty, sulky, pouty. Name all the 7 dwarves, all the bad dwarves of golf. Shitty, pouty, sulky. But because of, the work I've done the last few years, here I was in this qualifier. Yeah, would be disappointing to miss it because it means a lot to me. But the last hour that we were on the golf course, I was just being encouraging to the guys, good shot. Let's keep it going. Come on, guys. And I was like in a mode of encouragement and trying to be a good guy to play with. So it ends up, I'm like, we come in, I don't qualify, they do. And I moved on. I literally got in the car, drove to another tournament. So the next day I get an email from this guy and basically says, hey, it was great playing with you yesterday. Thanks I recommended a meditation app for him. He said, and finally, it was a pleasure playing with you. You're a great guy to play with, and I admired that you were cheering Dan and I on. You're a good player and a good playing partner. Catch you around the links. Now, I can tell you, without getting emotional, it wasn't so long ago I would have never gotten that note.
No, no.
When I got it, I thought, yeah, you didn't qualify, but I felt like I got a win out of it.
You won.
I won something. That was a better, like, I just couldn't imagine that 5 years ago, 7 years ago. So to me, that's sort of where I've evolved to and from, because the guy that I used to be would have never been able to see that there was a part of the game that's that. I don't know. That was probably, is that the longest answer anyone's ever given on the show? Because it felt long to me, and I was fascinated by it.
It's that long I would have forgotten the 3 questions I was going to ask you. No, I mean,
but you can see how that was, it really touched me.
Yeah, no, but here again, I think there's a huge paradox, isn't there? That if you go out to play golf and you have within you the intention of being a great playing partner,
yeah,
by being selfless and less selfish and less self-absorbed, you are actually creating great conditions to release your own capabilities, aren't you? It's a great paradox, really, of how the game works.
Absolutely. And to also look at it, again, I spent quite a bit of time with Dr. Pryor last summer. We had several sessions, and I absorbed a lot of it. But by the time I started working with Ray, I'd had conversations with you one-on-one. I've had conversations with Ed Coughlin, with Fred Shoemaker, with Doolin, many, many years with Doolin. So I was kind of ready to because even the last summer, I didn't qualify, and I was pretty bummed out. But back to what we talked about at the beginning about separating self from outcomes. I by the time this year rolled around, yeah, I was bummed out, but I also looked at it as in a total. I've had a great summer of golf. I've played in 10 or 12 events. I've had some pretty high finishes. Finished third a week ago at a big prestigious invitational. I've had a couple of fifths and seconds. So all in all, it's been great. Yeah, did I qualify for the biggest tournament? No, but I had a lunch with those guys. I moved on to the next tournament. The next day, Tim and I played a 2-man event. We finished second. It was great. Yeah, last week, whenever the tournament was on, the tournament I didn't qualify for, was a bit of a bummer. But I'm able to sort of step back and look at what I got out of that experience versus what I shot that day. And the thing I've learned that whether you're a 15 handicapper or whatever you play at, to know that, to expect you to be great all the time is what makes people crazy about this game.
Yeah.
And I now have a feeling of, hey, I can have a great experience that doesn't only revolve around how good a score I put up that day. Because I'm going to put up, as I say to some of the guys I talk to, all scores are possible. All scores are possible every time you play. All you have to do is look at some of the guys Thursday and Friday on the DP World Tour or the PGA Tour. Some of the scores they put up for them are very high, and yet they go to the next tournament. There's another event. There's another day to play. And that's how I look at golf now.
I can't even remember who it was who was on my show, Howard. I think it was a guy called Rupert Spearer, who is a kind of he is an official spiritual teacher.
As opposed to me, like a fake.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah, no, yours is from real genuine experience, so that makes it even more real. But what I'm sure it was Rupert who said that all of our problems come from either craving or resisting. We're either craving something that we think is going to happen in the future, or we're resisting something that's about to happen now. And obviously, there's a lot of wisdom in that. But what we're talking about, we've said it a few times here. But if you look at it on an individual shot, that on an individual golf shot, putt, chip, or whatever, if you are willing to accept that this could do a lot of things, left or right, high or low, when you actually stop resisting outcomes, the elephant's then out of the room, isn't it? Because the golf course then is not occurring to you, as Fred would say, the golf course is not occurring to you as a place of threat, it's occurring to you as a place of opportunity. And it sounds like that you've kind of crossed the bridge on that, really.
Absolutely. And I love that phrase from Fred. And it kind of circles back a little bit to going on stage. It is for a lot of people standing up in front of people, and you experience it with your seminars. I don't care if there's 10 people or 1,000 people. Walking out in front of people to present is perceived by most people as a very threatening environment, which is why most people avoid it.
Yeah.
I've been doing stand-up so long that, yeah, I get it. I get a bit of first tee nerves. And certainly the day of, I have a gig on the 15th of September. And I was talking to one of my daughters. He said, "Are you going to be doing any shows this fall?" I said, "Yeah, I just said yes to one." This was a couple of weeks ago. And as soon as I say yes, I start to get a little bit of something going, like, and one of my jokes with the younger comics, whenever I'm backstage and the lights go down, the music comes up, and you're like, okay, we're about to launch this ship. I always look around and go, I don't need this. I have RSPs, retirement savings. I don't need to be here. Grandpa could be at home. But I put myself in that situation simply because I like the feeling of facing those fears. Because, and it's such a great analogy about golf that, yes, it can be seen as a threatening environment unless you're willing to sort of be open to what might happen. Because usually when you're in that mode, what might happen is good, it's bad, it's bogeys, it's birdies, it's pars, it's a bad hole. But at the end of it, you're still fine. I used to be so drained. I used to be so spent at the end of a round of golf because I'd have spent so much time with my cortisol spiking and hammering my clubs into the ground and hating myself. In fact, I used to do this joke. Well, it was a joke. I used to say this on the first tee when everyone's going, play well, have a good day or whatever. I'd say, hey, how about we try not to hate ourselves too much when this thing's over? Because I play with a lot of guys still that have a level of self-loathing about them, about their golf games. You talk to them, it's what keeps you in business.
Do you think there's still a great reluctance to talk about these things
Absolutely.
like this? Yeah.
Well, we talk a lot about, this with my partner, Tim O'Connor, that, men have a reticence to really admit, especially around the game of golf, first of all, what it means to them and how badly it makes them feel about themselves. And it's really sad. I mean, I went through it, but it's sad because it's this thing that you love that becomes, as another Pryor thing, it becomes a source of misery. When the thing you love becomes a source of misery, can you imagine? We keep paying to do it over and over again, and that's another big takeaway for me. It is no longer. I've stopped having it be a source of misery for me, even when I don't qualify. This past weekend, I played in our full club championship with like some really, really, really good players. The kid that I played with the first 2 days, in fact, the two kids I played with, their combined ages were less than I am. So what are my expectations?
That's a humbling experience for itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Playing a golf course at 64 from 6,900 yards. So what are my expectations? Do the best I can, have fun. Well, I really enjoyed watching these two kids play. The young guy shot 69, 73 with me in 2 rounds. So I got to see high level golf. And in the end, I missed the cut by 2. So I walked away thinking, pretty good. I had a pretty good experience. A few years ago, I would have sat in my car and been hating on myself for whatever reason. but I did. The fact that I don't, I went out, so I didn't get to play. I missed the cut. So rather than be a dick yesterday, I was like, well, there's some things I'm working on with my swing. Went to a range, had a great time because I still enjoy it. I enjoy it now. I would say that in the end, for me, I've learned to enjoy golf in a way that I never thought possible. Even when I first met you years ago, I could never imagine enjoying the game at the level I do now. And that it was out there. The funny thing is, it was there all the time. It was there all the time, and I just couldn't see it.
And what's your I know you said on your own show, and we're all anybody who plays golf falls into this category to some degree. How are you with kind of tinkering around with technique and equipment and swing tips and all that kind of stuff? Has that also evolved over the years?
Well, I've never been much of a equipment person. We're lucky enough on our show. We have a sponsor, TaylorMade. They take care of us. So I just trust that they know what they're doing. Um, I've said this, that when we first started the show 9 years ago, I think we're up to 260-ish episodes because we only really do it weekly during the golf season. So it could have easily we call that Swing Thoughts to be sort of ironic because it's not about swings at all. But it could have been a show about actually the swing itself, which I love and I'm fascinated by it. It's like, there are some people that fly airplanes that are really into the gear of the airplanes, and there are some people that fly airplanes that are into the art of it, the majesty of aviation. I'm a little bit of both. I love working on my golf swing. I love practicing. Guys see me at the course are always making fun of me. Like I'll spend a couple hours chipping and putting because I like doing it. It's not just that I'm practicing for my game. It's like I talked to Fred about this. Sometimes I'm not working on anything. I just like being around it. I started working at a golf course when I was 11 years old. Golf courses, it's funny, there's three places I'm very comfortable: golf courses, comedy clubs, and radio stations. Because I've been in those environments most of my life. So when I go to a golf course, there's a great Yiddish word, and it means sort of family or familia. It's beshert. There's a real feeling of familiarity to me. So yeah, I tinker around with it. Like I went to the range yesterday with my lady friend, and we were just playing around for a couple hours. Get some balls, chipped and putted, then had lunch. Like it's like an environment that makes me feel good. So yeah, to answer your question again, I apologize for going an hour, but I still, yes, I'm still always working on something, but sometimes just for the fun of it.
And I think again that's very different, isn't it? I think working on your game because you love to work on your game and you're fascinated by hitting shots and all that kind of stuff is very different from falling into the trap that at some point somebody will give you a formula to protect you from bad shots.
That's right. Now we call that anti-fragility, or yeah, well, and again, not to keep pimping out Dr. Pryor, but that
This has
idea.
been the biggest advert for Raymond's work.
No, I know. Well, we should send him a note and go, by the way, Howard still loves you. Listen, I've had great conversations with you, and I remember I was having some trouble with my putting, and I'm not sure if the Lost Art of Putting had come out yet, but we talked about putting, and it was basically this: like, if you're trying to be too studied, or you think you're going to find the stroke where you'll never miss another putt, that isn't the point of it. That's why I love that your series of books is the lost art of the short game. Because ultimately, I've been doing this a long time. I'm not saying my technique is perfect, but I pretty much have a decent idea of how to technically hit those shots. But it's the art of it. It's what I said, it's the majesty of aviation. There's an art to flying an airplane. So now I've even forgot what I was going to say. But yeah, so some days I go to the golf course to work on something technical. But I remember having this conversation with Fred Shoemaker, and he said, he'll go to a range at the end of a day, just as the sun is sort of setting, and just hit shots for the pure joy of it. And that was lost on me for a long time.
That wonderful clip Howard, isn't? I don't know whether you've seen it. I think I mentioned it on the podcast before. It's everybody should watch it. I think it's called the practice of practicing. Fred Shoemaker, and it's just Fred out late at night, and he's hitting balls against the
Yeah.
backdrop of the mountains, and he just it's these lovely sort of punch draws. And he's talking about how his breathing slows down, and he's so in tune with the club. And it's just as you say, he's out there not for. How often have we fallen into the trap of this practice session is not about this practice session. This practice session is the hope that if I find something, it will protect
Yeah.
me tomorrow in the tournament, as opposed to just being deeply engaged with just hitting golf shots for their own sake.
Golf has taught me a lot from the things I've read, the things I've experienced, the people I've gotten to speak to, yourself included. And what it's shown me, it kind of hit me a few years ago. This concept, and you just touched on it again, of the people in golf practice are looking for a way to cocoon themselves from someone if they can just find the formula. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about all golfers, and I say people at the same time, have this idea that maybe today's the day nothing bad will happen. And this is a Sam Harris thing as well. Because, people go through their lives, they wake up every day and they get in their cars, and all of a sudden traffic sucks. And they're like, traffic sucks. Well, did you not expect that?
Yeah.
And did you think today's the day that traffic wouldn't suck? And as Sam Harris says, one day you can't find your phone, or you lost your credit cards or something. Things are always going to happen
Every day.
every day. And so in golf, like I said, that idea that a lot of golfers like to sneak up on a round. That's why, you've made a great living helping people understand the difference between the range and the first tee, because the first tee is the first time that day where anything's really mattered. And golfers would like it to just everything to go okay. But in every round of competitive golf I've played this year, even the ones where I played, pretty well, there were moments when, for a few holes, things went a little bit south, or I hit a bad shot unexpectedly. But my ascension to spiritual leader status is only on the backs of this one concept that when things go wrong, I now have a different mode of behavior for that outcome. Because there was a time if I made a bad shot or had a bad hole, I used to do this. I would have a triple bogey, followed by a double bogey, followed by a bogey, because it would take me 2 or 3 holes to calm down. Whereas some of my most proud moments on a golf course have been where in Saturday's opening round, I went 6 over in a 4-hole stretch, and I played the rest of the round even par, because I walked off the second of 2 double bogeys and went, well, let's see how this hole goes. As opposed to looking at this story of, I had a couple of bad breaks, whatever. And there's no guarantee, by the way, and I'll finish this last diatribe by saying, I've learned this. Your attitude affects everything. Now, there's no guarantee if you have a good attitude, things will go well. But there is a guarantee. If your attitude is shite, things are not, there's no opportunity to change the paradigm at that moment.
Yeah, if you're waiting for the game to make you feel happy, you'll be waiting most of the time, won't you? Unfortunately.
That's right.
So, Howard, I knew it was going to be a wide-ranging, varied conversation, and we didn't let each other down. We had no script as ever, but thanks ever so much for sharing your time and your experiences, and being honest about your own challenges that you've had in various areas. What would be the one last thing from the spiritual leader that you'd like to leave with people?
Well, I should have saved the mantra, play great or be great to play with. But I would say that finally what I've learned, and if I could sum up all the nonsense that's come out of my mouth the last 45 minutes, is that what I just said a moment ago, behavior is a choice. It's a practice like any other practice, meditation, yoga, whatever. And what they say in some of those other spiritual domains is it's a practice. It's not perfect. Golf is a practice. And back to the origin story of golf is not a game of perfect. Absorbing that concept will definitely make a difference in how you can whatever outcome you want, it will make a difference in it.
Yeah. And just let everybody know if they haven't listened to the show just yet, just fill in the details of Swing Thoughts with Tim.
That's it. It's Swing Thoughts on Spotify, everywhere else you get podcasts. And we tape usually every week during the golf season. And coming up on I think it'll be the 14th of August, which will be released a couple of days, will be our guest for a Hall of Fame, another Hall of Fame lap with Dr. Karl Morris. Thank you for having me on the show. I've been a big fan, and I know a lot of the Swing Thoughts listeners listen to your show as well, and it's well worth the time.
Thanks ever so much, Howard. That's been great.
Karl, I hope that wasn't